The show opens with a woman named Yeon-seo, who was once a highly talented ballet dancer, but one day she suffered a terrible accident that left her blind, burying not only her sight but also her dreams. Due to this misfortune, she has become short-tempered and frequently scolds and dismisses her household staff over minor issues. The only person who truly understands her is her secretary, Mr. Jo, who has been like a father figure to her ever since her parents passed away. Then there's her chief maid, Yoo-mi, who remains loyal to Yon Seo despite all her tantrums and rudeness. In another scene, we are introduced to a handsome angel, Dan, spending his final day on Earth before returning to heaven. He then approaches a truck driver transporting stolen dogs for illegal breeding. Dan, who is invisible, confuses him by making his lighter float and startling him into swerving off the road. In the ensuing chaos, all the dogs manage to flee except for one, still trapped in its cage and gravely injured. Dan gently places his hand on the suffering dog and wishes it peace before sending it to heaven. Next, a pleased Dan heads to the park to relax when he comes across Yon Seo with her dog. She's soon approached by two teenagers who begin mocking her blindness and even attempt to touch her inappropriately. The worried angel moves to intervene, but before he can act, Yon Seo swiftly draws her cane and strikes the troublemakers with it, causing them to run away in fear. The sight surprises Dan, so he follows Yon Seo and sits beside her on a park bench. To his shock, she senses his presence and asks if he's a pervert trying to harass her. Dan screams in panic and gets confused, as ordinary humans cannot see angels. He begins to freak out and runs away, but Yon Seo manages to grab his handkerchief. She then calls Yoo-mi to catch the pervert running away, but to their surprise, the latter sees no one. That evening, Dan meets with his senior angel, Mr. Hu, and inquires whether humans can sense the presence of angels. Mr. Hu responds that it is impossible, and warns that if he touches a human, he will turn to dust. He cautions Dan to be careful, especially since he must leave Earth at midnight tomorrow. Dan agrees, but soon realizes his handkerchief is missing, which causes him to panic, as it's a significant cloth that represents his status as an angel. A frantic Dan then rushes to the park to find his handkerchief, but it is nowhere in sight. With his options running out, he arrives at Yeon Seo's house, only to find her asleep, tightly clutching the handkerchief. He tries desperately to retrieve it, but is unsuccessful since he cannot touch her. The next day, Yon Seo and Mr. Jo head out to attend an event, with Dan following them. They arrive at the 20th anniversary celebration of Fantasia, the ballet company founded by Yon Seo's parents. There, Yon Seo encounters her wicked aunt, Choi, and her family. It turns out that Choi has taken control of the foundation, and her youngest daughter, Nina, is now the lead dancer. It is clear that Choi harbors bad intentions toward Yon Seo and doesn't want her to return to the company. Furthermore, she has deliberately scheduled this event on the anniversary of Yon Seo's parents' death to inflict pain on the poor girl. Shortly after, the event begins, with the dancers performing Swan Lake on the stage. Meanwhile, Yon Seo is seen gracefully dancing alone in an empty hallway while recalling the steps from her memory. After the performance, Yon Seo steps onto the stage and delivers a bitter speech, much to her aunt's displeasure. She declares that today is not just the anniversary of Fantasia, but also the anniversary of her parents' death, and she briefly considered hanging herself to make the event more dramatic. She also reminds everyone that Nina had been nothing more than an understudy before Yeon Seo lost her eyesight. During her speech, a man named Kang Woo watches her with keen interest. Later, as Yeon Seo is leaving, Dan looks at her and recalls her previous performance, which impressed him. We also learn that he had finally managed to retrieve his handkerchief and even applauded at the end of her dance. In another scene, Yeon Seo and Mr. Jo are driving home when their car suddenly swerves violently. Mr. Jo quickly realizes the brakes aren't working, and a flashback reveals someone had deliberately tampered with the vehicle in the parking lot earlier. He desperately tries to regain control, but the car skids off the road, flipping through the air and colliding with a bridge. The impact is brutal, leaving both of them gravely injured and their lives hanging in the balance. Shortly after, Dan comes across them and feels sorry for the two, but he can't do anything since he isn't allowed to intervene. He approaches Yeon Seo and tells her to rest in peace before turning away. To his shock, Yeon Seo hears him and asks who he is. She then begins to cry and beg for help, leaving Dan unable to understand how it's even possible. In the distance, heavenly bells ring, signaling that it's midnight and he must prepare to return to heaven. Seconds later, the car finally slides over the ledge, sending Yeon Seo and Mr. Jo hurtling toward the water. It seems like it's over for them, but at the last moment, Dan uses his powers to stop time and cause the car to hover in midair. Next, Dan swoops down with his wings and uses his powers to set the car back on the road. He even touches Yon Seo's cheek, which is actually a serious offense for an angel. After this, the angel is immediately summoned by his superior, so he leaves an injured Yon Seo alone in the car with the unconscious Mr. Jo. Fortunately, Kang Woo soon comes across them, and he quickly calls an ambulance. He then holds Yon Seo's hands and reassures her that she will be fine, which comforts her. On the other hand, Dan meets with his superior, who scolds him for committing a major offense and says he should be punished. The angel also apologizes for his actions and prepares to be turned to dust. But surprisingly, Mr. Hu informs him that he has been given a chance to redeem himself because of his past good deeds. He then gives Dan a hospital room number, explaining that there is a woman there for whom the angel must find love within 100 days. During this time, he will take human form and will only be allowed to return to heaven once his mission is complete. Dan is thrilled by the opportunity and thanks his superior before heading off to find the woman. In the next scene, Yon Seo wakes up in the hospital, where she seems to be recovering from the accident. She then opens her eyes and is shocked that she can finally see, which astonishes her. Yon Seo realizes she's surrounded by Aunt Choi and her family, who express their concern for her, but she's just worried about Mr. Jo and is distraught to learn that he tragically passed away in the accident. It turns out he donated his cornea to Yon Seo so she could see again and resume her life as a ballerina. This really devastates Yon Seo, and she regrets and cries as she remembers how rude she used to be to him. A while later, Dan arrives at the hospital and is shocked to discover that the woman he must find love for is none other than Yon Seo. He immediately gives up, knowing how cold-hearted she is and how rudely she treats everyone. Dan believes she is incapable of love and heads to find his senior to request another task. But Mr. Hu tells him that he has no choice but to carry out the mission if he wants to lift his punishment and return to heaven. The next day, we see Yon Seo at home, still grieving for Mr. Jo and appearing completely distraught. She is approached by Yu Mi, who advises her to shine again and not let Mr. Jo's sacrifice go to waste. This makes our heroine very emotional, and she hurriedly tries to leave, but her body suddenly becomes limp, and she can't walk. A doctor is immediately called, and upon examination, they discover that Yon Seo has been temporarily paralyzed due to the psychological trauma she just experienced. The scene then cuts to Fantasia, where the dancers are doing their routine practice, when suddenly Kang Woo appears and introduces himself as the new managing director of the company. He declares that the dancers are incompetent and outdated, so he plans to train them from the ground up. He also announces that he wants Yon Seo to be the new lead, replacing the current lead, Nina. Upon hearing this, Choi's eldest daughter, Runa, who is the manager of the place, arrives and begins arguing with him. But their argument is soon cut short by Choi, and the three of them head to the office to discuss. Kang Woo then reveals that he wants to hire Yon Seo as his lead dancer, but the two women strongly disagree. However, when he points out that the contract states he has the authority to make such decisions, they warn him that Yon Seo is very difficult to convince. Elsewhere, we see Yu Mi and Yon Seo conducting interviews to hire a new secretary, but Yon Seo doesn't like any of the candidates and ends up rejecting them all. Shortly after, Dan also arrives to interview for the position, but as expected, Yon Seo rejects him before he even has a chance to properly introduce himself. This frustrates Dan, and he accidentally blurts out some insulting words, which Yon Seo overhears. The embarrassed angel immediately runs away, but Yon Seo chases after him, and everyone is shocked to realize that she's walking again. Yumi then tries to convince that this man is good for her and begs her to hire him. Yon Seo refuses at first, but after some insistence, she finally agrees, and Dan ends up moving into the house. In the following days, Dan starts learning all of Yon Seo's habits and daily routines, and he has to always be available whenever she needs him. She even makes him take martial arts lessons so that he can protect her in case of any threats. One evening, while Dan is sweeping leaves in the front yard, it suddenly begins to rain. His wings then unexpectedly appear, and he has no idea how to make them disappear. At the same time, Yon Seo also summons him, leaving him panicked as he desperately tries to figure out what to do. Meanwhile, Yon Seo frantically searches for him when, all of a sudden, someone smashes her window, scattering shards of glass. The sight immediately triggers her trauma, reminding her of the stage accident years ago when glass had fallen into her eyes. In the meantime, Kang Woo arrives at the house holding a cake and rings the buzzer but receives no response. Inside, Yon Seo looks up in surprise as she notices the chandelier shaking violently from the strong wind blowing through the shattered window. She freezes and is unable to move as the chandelier suddenly comes crashing down. Fortunately, at the last moment, Dan shows up out of nowhere and protects her from the falling shards of glasses. After Dan calms the shaken woman, he suddenly begins to panic when he realizes that his wings are still attached. Yon Seo stares at him in shock and she assumes he's some kind of pervert cosplaying as an angel. She demands that he take off the wings immediately, which Dan obviously refuses. This only fuels Yon Seo's anger, leading to a heated argument between the two. Dan quickly flees from there, and unexpectedly, when the rain stops, his wings also disappear. Moments later, Kang Woo arrives at the house, but Dan thinks he must have been the one to smash the window and immediately tackles him to the ground. He quickly calls Yon Seo as well, and she demands to know who this man is. Kang Woo calmly introduces himself, revealing how he just joined her ballet company and is here to meet her. But Yon Seo isn't interested in any discussion and asks him to leave. The man suggests she report to the police about the window smashing, but she refuses and requests to keep this incident private. The next morning, Dan interrogates all the security staff about the events of the previous night. trying to find out who broke the window and tampered with the chandelier. Shortly after, Kang-woo also returns to the house with a detective. This enrages Yon Seo, as she had specifically told him not to involve the police. Kang-woo then reassures her that the detective is just a friend and is here doing a personal favor. They then pull out the CCTV footage from the previous night, and Dan worries that his wings will be visible. But fortunately, the footage mysteriously malfunctions. As it turns out, the CCTV technician is his superior angel, Mr. Hu. The faulty footage makes Dan very happy and relieved, which Yon Seo finds very suspicious. Afterward, she asks him to get the car ready, as they need to go somewhere. But Dan nervously admits that he doesn't know how to drive, so Kang-woo offers to give them a ride. When they arrive at the destination, Kang-woo stays in the car while the two go inside to visit her parents and Mr. Joe's memorial. Yon Seo speaks to her parents with tears, expressing how targeted she feels these days and how she is still angry at them for leaving her alone. Dan, who is quietly listening, feels sad for her and realizes that she also has a human side. Later, while the two are leaving the building, it suddenly begins to rain. Dan worries that his wings will show, so he rushes inside, saying he needs to get an umbrella. Yon Seo is left all alone, when suddenly Kang-woo arrives and begins chatting with her. He says he wants to show her something exciting and pulls out a projector, from which he displays Yon Seo's old ballet performance videos. Kang-woo then says that he admires her talent so much that it drives him crazy. He tells her that she shouldn't waste time walking in everyday shoes when she could be dancing. Moments later, the rain stops and Dan arrives, so the three begin to drive home. On the way, Kang-woo nearly hits an obstruction on the road and swerves to the side. This triggers Yon Seo, who recalls the accident from a few days ago and covers her head in horror. Kang-woo then takes her hand and assures her that everything is fine. His touch finally makes her realize that it was him during her accident who held her hand for comfort and called the ambulance. Yon Seo asks if it was him that night, which he confirms, and he gives her the necklace she had dropped while getting on the ambulance. She is touched by this gesture, and the two look at each other, while Dan comes up with an idea to make them fall in love. Days later, Dan and Yon Seo return home after some work, only to be shocked to see Nina and her father, who have prepared a surprise party for her recovery. Yon Seo is very angry to see them, and soon learns that her aunt is here as well. Upstairs, we see Aunt Choi snooping through some important documents, which she eventually finds and steals. Soon Choi also joins the party, and Nina starts a live stream to share the celebratory moment. But Yon Seo becomes deeply upset and says that she received her eyes from a dead man, which isn't something to celebrate. Nina, who seems a genuine person, expresses how thrilled she is that they'll be dancing together again, but Yon Seo responds by insulting her as well. After the family storms off in anger, Dan scolds Yon Seo for being harsh with them when they were just trying to cheer her up. This leads to an argument between them, and a furious Yon Seo flings a piece of cake at him, sparking a full-blown food fight. They even grab at each other's hair, after which Yon Seo finally snaps and fires him. Dan is deeply disappointed and feels foolish for ever having hoped she is capable of loving other people. That evening, an upset Dan is wandering alone when he comes across Yumi, who takes him out for a drink. While drinking, she tries to convince Dan to return, saying that he is the only one Yon Seo has felt comfortable with for so long. She reveals that she is surprised Yon Seo bickered with him, as she hasn't done that with anyone in 10 years. The scene then cuts to Yon Seo, who feels bad about what happened and tries to call Dan, but soon stops herself. Soon, she hears someone calling her outside and is shocked to see that it's a drunk Dan. He then approaches her and notices a cut on her hand, so he wraps the wound with his handkerchief. Yon Seo is touched by this, and they share a sweet moment as he holds her hands and makes her dance with him. At one point, he leans in closer, and she thinks he is about to kiss her, but he merely passes out on her shoulder, leaving a stunned Yon Seo too nervous to move. The next morning, Dan wakes up outside and begins to panic when he recalls that he danced with Yon Seo the night before. Before he can process it, several cops arrive and take him away for trespassing. Dan protests that he didn't intrude and that he works there, only to discover that it was Yon Seo who reported him. Before he is taken away, Yon Seo confronts him, asking why he's here and whether they had met before when she was blind. A flashback from last night reveals that she had recognized his handkerchief and remembered their meeting at the park. Furthermore, Dan had been mumbling in his sleep about the mission he has to complete before he leaves. She asks who sent him, and Dan nervously says higher power and points toward the sky to imply God. But she assumes he's a spy sent by her enemies to harm her, which explains the glass shattering and the CCTV footage malfunctioning. Although Dan tries to explain that it's not true, the cops eventually drag him to the station and begin questioning him. Dan continues insisting that he never tried to hurt Yon Seo, and after a while the cops grow annoyed and let him go. Elsewhere, Yumi is furious that Yon Seo didn't forgive Dan and urges her to call him back. When Yon Seo tries to explain that he is a spy, Yumi comes up with another theory. She claims that instead of being a spy, he must have fallen in love with her at first sight the day they met at the park and pursued her. This explains why he claimed he was sent by a higher power, meaning God. Upon hearing this, Yon Seo is stunned, and even though she secretly likes the idea, she refuses to hire him back. In another scene, Dan heads to his superior and requests to be sent to heaven, but Mr. Hu refuses. Dan complains about how cold-hearted Yon Seo is and says he'll never fall in love with anyone, but his superior refuses to take no for an answer and sends him flying. A worried Dan at least asks for some money to buy food, but his superior walks away, leaving our hero broke and homeless. Don't forget to subscribe, and let's reach 2,000 likes or 200 comments if you want the next part.